Hey everyone, we are live in Boston. This is Brew Talks presented by Dogfish Head and sponsored by the Reyes Beer Division. I'm your host, Justin Kindle. I'm going to turn this over in a little bit to Zoe Licata. But thank you to everyone who came out today and support for the Massachusetts Brewers Guild. Some of the proceeds, give it up for the Guild. Some of the proceeds of this ticket that you got today are going to the Guild, and we've got the Guild president here. We're going to talk to him in a minute, but I want to give a shout out first to the Brewbound team who is doing all the things behind the scenes so Zoe and I can be up here and do this thing. So please give it up for them. I also want to shout out some of the guilds that traveled from across New England to be here today. It's super cool that you came out, so we want to appreciate you. We appreciate you being here and supporting us, supporting the Mass Guild and everybody else, so give it up for them as well. So we have 3 conversations today. The first is going to be me and Adam up here from Castle Island. We're going to talk about the Guild's priorities and just the state of Massachusetts. Then I'm going to turn this over to Zoe, and she's going to talk about what's next for the hazy IPA style. She's got great panelists from Vitamin C, Boston Beer's Downtown Brewery, the Samuel Adams Brewery, Wormtown, and Mighty Squirrel. And then we're going to take a networking break for a few minutes, so if you're watching at home, stick around, and then I'll be back up here and we're going to talk state of the industry with Dogfish Head, Bump Williams Consulting, Burke Distributing, and Total Wine and more. So lots to come here, but let's get started. Adam Romanow, Castle Island founder, the Massachusetts Brewers Guild president, thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So we know the craft market has taken some lumps lately. The news today is that Anchor in San Francisco is going to cease operations. They're going to be liquidated. That's the big news. And, this is a story that's playing out across the country. But, when you temperature check the health of the Massachusetts scene, what are you getting back? What are you hearing?
Yeah, we actually just recently completed a health of the industry survey. This is something that we at the Guild do every single year. And there was, to be clear, a little bit of mixed messaging, but by and large, a number of our members are still feeling upbeat and positive about the industry. About 50% of our members are actually growing year-over-year revenue. We're seeing people looking to expand. Half of our members are looking at expanding next year with additional locations. So there's definitely a lot of positivity. But we are also seeing some of our members who are seeing sales decline, some who are worried about the amount of debt that they're carrying. So it's a little bit of a mixed message. One very consistent trend that we've seen, which I'm sure is a surprise to nobody tuning in right now, is that members have seen a big shift in their sort of revenue makeup, where wholesale revenue is starting to become a smaller piece of the pie and the direct-to-consumer revenue, predominantly tap rooms, becoming a larger piece of the pie. That's kind of the one very consistent message that we're seeing. But on the whole, I think it's cautious optimism mixed with keeping an eye on the news trends, because they do get a little scary when you hear about a legend like Anchor closing their doors.
So as the Guild president, what do you tell them? What do you tell your members who are in some ways hurting, as you laid out, and some of them are thriving? But what's the message to them that you want to provide today?
The message is pretty simple to me, quite honestly. It's stay the course, but get focused, get lean, know who you are, know what your brand is, understand your portfolio, what that mix is, and what your approach to market is. I know these seem like really simple building blocks, but quite honestly, the tailwind that we've had the last several years isn't really there anymore. So there's still a good reason to stay optimistic, but it's a really good time to kind of drill into the core of your business, the core of your brand, and work what's working.
A little more on that focus point, because that's something you and I have talked about before, and I really like that. So how is Castle Island getting focused and simplifying?
So we haven't always embraced this mentality, but our current mode of thinking is really less is more. So we're looking at everything from the portfolio that goes out to wholesale, the portfolio that stays in the tap room, Even our event programming in the tap room, we're kind of turning over every stone and saying, does this still make sense to do? Does it fit within our brand? Do we see some sort of an ROI? Not always a financial ROI, although that's obviously key as well. But are we getting some sort of lift somewhere from it? If we are, then we keep it. If we're not, then we look at maybe replacing it or just discontinuing it altogether. But for anyone who's ever heard of like the parking lot exercise, you basically take everything you're doing, you put it back out in the parking lot, and it doesn't come back in the building unless you can justify a reason for doing it. We're sort of doing that on a day-by-day rolling basis right now.
You're the Marie Kondo of brewing at this point, right?
That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me.
Thank you. That's why I'm here, you know. The other thing I want to get into is the Guild's legislative priorities, and that really boils down to two things: brewpub self-distribution privileges and farmers market sales privileges. Where are those two items at this point?
So the legislative process, especially in the Commonwealth, as everyone knows, is a long and grinding process. We've got 2 years to get these goals over the threshold. Right now, we've been attending committee hearings. We've had a ton of meetings with our state legislators, trying to get them up to speed on what exactly these issues are. We have some freshman legislators this year as well, which happens every 2 years. But when you get new blood in, they may not know what the issues are. So we still have legislators at the state level who think that breweries can self-distribute as brew pubs, or that they can sell beer at farmers markets. Consumers also think that that's the case, and it's not. So we have our work cut out for us to continue educating the consumers, continue educating the legislators, and continue to fire up our member base to get out there and help champion these across the goal line.
On the surface, those don't appear to be too big of asks. I mean, as an outsider looking at that, but you know, why is it hard to get those two over the hump at this point?
Yeah, I mean, we'd like to think that they're reasonable asks. The brew pub self-distribution issue candidly impacts a fairly small subset of the breweries in the state. I think there are about 50-ish licensed brew pubs in Massachusetts out of about 220 licensed breweries altogether. So we're talking about a legislative priority for a smaller section of the membership that makes it a little bit tougher for some of the non-brew pub members to get fired up about. As for farmers markets, that's something that would benefit all of us, but we really need to do a better job as a guild of getting our membership energized and really campaigning to see these things through. There is a little bit of opposition, but the work rests on our shoulders.
What's the challenge in getting everybody galvanized, because it's sort of that, you know, rising tide lifts all boats type of proposition?
I mean, I think the challenges of the last several years haven't helped in the pantheon of priorities, and the fact that there are still, unfortunately, 24 hours in a day. You got to prioritize what matters most to your business. And much as I hate to say it, I think that these are not the highest priorities for everyone, or at least high enough to really see them through. But, you know, again, as you said, they're pretty simple asks, and they will make a huge difference to the members that we have that care about them. And the other thing that we're not talking about is they make a huge difference to the consumers. If a consumer can buy beer at a farmer's market, if a consumer can get a brew pub's beer at the bar next door to the brew pub and not have to worry about it traveling 100 miles round trip, which could damage the beer, but it certainly adds cost and all that, that benefits consumers as well. So the other thing we need to be doing is really more consumer outreach. And the Guild is doing this right now. We've got 2 petitions online, 1 for each of the legislative agendas that we have. We're also dumping a fair amount of money into a video marketing campaign to educate consumers, and again, those wonderful legislators, on what these bills are all about. And we're hoping that through better engagement with those 3 groups, the members, the consumers, and the legislators, we can see these through.
So final question for you, is there anything else that you expect to be added to the Guild's agenda in the upcoming years?
Nothing immediately on our radar. That being said, it doesn't mean that we can take this time to rest on our laurels. This is actually one of the more important times to get down to work and start reinforcing those relationships with the state legislators. Those relationships were really critical during the pandemic, when all sorts of pandemic-related efforts were being put into place but needed legislative support. We could pick up the phone and call people we already knew to help get that done. That's where we're at right now. We're sort of in the entrench and reinforce phase.
Well, thanks for doing this, Adam. We always appreciate you giving your support to us and, you know, sharing what's going on here in Massachusetts. So thanks for doing it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's bring up our first panel, and I'm going to turn this over to Zoe.
Hello, everybody. Just get all our panelists up here. Today, we're going to be talking about IPAs, New England IPAs, hazies. What do we even call them anymore? And what comes next? So everyone, come on up. Join me on stage. Get nice and cozy up here. Touch some knees a little bit. All right, so joining me to talk about the haze craze and what comes next, we have, to my left right here, Dino Finari, founder of Vitamin C. Then next we have Naveen Power, co-founder of Mighty Squirrel. Megan Parisi, who is the head brewer over at the Samuel Adams Boston Tap Room down over by Faneuil Hall. And Kimberly Galinsky, who's president and general manager of Wormtown. Welcome, guys. Yeah. I also want to shout out that we have a text line. So if you have any questions for our panelists, either on this panel or the one after our break later, just text 617-336-8560. We'll repeat it again throughout the day, but let us know if you have any questions. One more time, I got you. It's 617-336-8560. So the reason why we're having this panel is hazy IPAs, New England IPAs, they had their big craze. Now it seems like we're kind of getting to somewhere where it's maybe a little stagnant or that the growth is slowing down. Imperials are all the rage right now. But the reason why we want to talk about this is it's become such a wide array of beers within this definition. So let's start and go down the panel and say, what even is a New England Hazy IPA? What is it to you? How do you define it? And how are you participating in that style? Dino, you want to start?
Well, I would say the word stagnant probably isn't the right word. I think of it more as like maturity. I think we're in that kind of a phase right now. For us, it's always been about that haze, right? So we typically call them hazy IPAs versus New England IPAs. And I know we've also talked about them being more juicy versus bitter, and I'd say that probably encompasses how we describe them.
Mm-hmm. Naveen, what are you making that fits in this style?
Yeah, from our perspective, like juicy IPA or New England IPA or hazy IPA, so they kind of go together. Even though sometimes I would like to think that it's more about the juice. That it should be juicy to be considered a New England IPA, right? But at the same time, and each time I think about that, and then I go on the Instagram and somebody's posting a picture of a hazy IPA, they're like, oh, it's so juicy. I'm like, how do you figure out it's juicy from a picture on Instagram? So actually, anyways, but yeah, that's the world we live in right now, actually. And so New England IPA is more, even though I would like to believe it's more about juiciness, but hazy defines the New England IPA at this moment.
Yeah, I think it's gotten kind of, dare I say, murky over the past several years, where originally, New England IPA had its big hallmark of not just the haze, but that juiciness, that real juice-forward, profile. But the style and that hazy range has expanded to encompass and welcome more, non-super juicy flavors, where it's not just like drinking, hoppy orange juice. So there's not really one style definition or even how we're approaching it exactly, say at the tap room. But I won't define a hazy beer as a New England style if it's not juicy. For me, then it kind of falls into a hazy category, because for me, I still have in my mind that the main hallmark of New England style IPA is going to be that juiciness. Then there's the hazy IPA category. Then there's the milkshakes. Then there's the fruited hazies. It just goes on and on. But for me, the hallmark of the New England style is still that juice-forward profile.
I have to agree with everything they've said. At Wormtown, we've got our East Coast and our West Coast, and our West Coast is our flagship, which is kind of different from most of the other, when you see those hazy, definitely juicy IPAs, people are looking for, consistency, people are looking for that juice, people are definitely looking for a depth of flavor, and so seeing micro or craft breweries being able to consistently produce a juicy, hazy New England IPA that tastes the same every time you open one of those is definitely a benchmark for our industry. So yeah, the juice bombs, that's what people are looking for. And I'd say that's 100% we own that in New England, so.
And a lot of your definitions are talking about the flavor, the taste profile. How much does the actual visual of it being hazy matter right now?
I mean, for us, I think it's very important. I mean, you know, and we're one of those breweries that's guilty of filling a glass that looks like yellow paint, but that's what people like, and you know, I think that's the first thing they see, and it's like, oh wow, you know, and kind of on what Naveen was saying. I mean, they see that and they're like, oh, this looks juicy, right? Based on what they've had before, maybe.
Same here. I spoke about this before. Yeah, like we made a non-hazy, very juicy IPA, and at least in our case, the customers were like, "Dude, what happened here?" I'm like, "Yeah." So the haziness matters a lot. At the same time, we have seen some of the great IPAs from Vermont. Like they are not that hazy, which are the classic New England IPAs, but somehow that's okay. But for a newer brewery to come out with a not very hazy looking IPA, then it gets tough with the customers.
I think with what he was saying too, I mean, those Vermont IPAs, if you will, I think back in the day they were hazy, right? But as with a lot of the other things that we've all done, we've just pushed the limits further and further and further, and now, you know, it's clearly defined the category, I think.
I think we've seen a bit of a change at our taproom location because we have, you know, such a really broad range of consumers who come in, because we've got a huge range of people that are local, that work in the area, but also every tourist in Boston walks by our front door, and at least half of them walk in. So people have a different threshold for what they're willing to try when they see 20 lines available too. So we may have, I think we may see a little more leeway with that, but I still can't in good conscience call anything a hazy or a New England if it's not hazy. And to me, that haze, I have to hold up my fingers on the other side of the glass, and if I can see them distinctively, it's not in that category. Then it can still be maybe a juicy IPA, but it's not going to fall into a hazy or a New England definition, because you should not have that definition. It doesn't have to look like, and it never should look like, like
Yellow
you just
paint.
Yeah, it shouldn't. Well, no, it shouldn't look like true. It shouldn't look like you pulled it off the bottom of the tank. But it should, but you can see your fingers as one big mass, and then that passes muster.
And our New England IPA is definitely what Naveen was talking about. It's you can see through it. It stands up next to our West Coast, our East Coast. They're pretty close to it, but it does still have that flavor. It's full, but it is not that hazy, and it does fit more in line with those Vermont ones, the Vermont IPAs that he was talking about. So we're definitely the outlier on what our IPA is, the one that we released to the wild. The ones that are in our tap room, you pour it out and you're looking at it and you're like, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So we definitely have both of them, but what we send out, we have a couple out there right now that we do, there are those hazy ones, but the tap room is a much better place where we can test what the customer really wants. And so when we pour it out of the draft and people just start smiling, that's what they're looking for, and they know that's that New England IPA, that they're assuming it's that juicy beer. And when they get it, it is. But when you look at our Don't Worry, it definitely is on the other side of that spectrum.
Now, Kimberly, before you were at Wormtown, you were at Treehouse for a while, and that place was known for the style and for people lining up and waiting to get their hands on the beer. What was it that created that literal haze craze that you see from consumers like the ones going to Treehouse?
I'd have to say that consistency is the biggest thing. Again, just that beer, every time you opened one of those beers, it consistently tastes like what you were expecting. And so managing that expectation by being able to consistently brew a beer that's what you expect, that's big for a consumer. Doing it on a small system, then growing up into a bigger system, even Wormtown did that, went from a small system to a big system, and she was there for that. So being able for a brewery to be able to continuously brew what the customer is expecting, that's a big deal. Why people lined up at Treehouse for those beers, I don't know, mystery. I can't say for sure, but every time you open a Julius, it was a Julius. But it's the same thing with all of our beers. Basically, when you open those beers, they're consistent, and that's I think what puts some of those beers ahead of the rest. That consistency for sure.
Yeah. Now, Megan, like Kimberly just mentioned, you were at Wormtown before Samuel Adams, and you were there with the creation of Be Hoppy. When did you start to see that transition, or what caused that transition from kind of looking for that West Coast to now more of the East Coast style?
I think I told this sort of funny story when we were chatting, last week before we all got together here about when we transitioned from the original brewery on Park Avenue to the now current brewery on Shrewsbury Street. The old brewery did not have the bright tank did not have the capacity to cool below about 38 degrees, so we could just never get that beer bright, and we didn't have any filters, we didn't do anything. So B Hoppy was always hazier than a lot of other beers, even though it was a West Coast profile IPA. When we got to the Shrewsbury Street location, new system, new chiller, the ability to actually cool our beers down to 33, get it to drop bright, it was fantastic. We matched the flavor profile, everything. We were so excited. We released the first batch to the public, and all we heard was, what happened to our beer? You changed our beer because it lost that haze. And we hadn't done anything except, in our minds, we're thinking, but we finally made it the way we wanted to. We made it better. It's properly aged and bright, and we still didn't filter it. But the response was, that profile, even though the taste hadn't changed, the visual aspect of it was still just as important as the aroma and taste and finish of it. And we had to then figure out how to kind of get that haze back in without changing the recipe too, and it was a huge shock to us.
Yeah, it's so funny how the disconnect can sometimes happen between the industry knowledge and the consumer, and if that matters sometimes. Do you see from that downtown Boston location, are you seeing any shift back to looking for some of those beers?
We definitely see a draw towards our Pilsners, our West Coast IPAs, but we also have, again, such a broad range of visitors that we're going to we're going to try to have something for everyone, and everyone's going to be willing to try a lot of different things. Some of our hazies are going to be our bigger draws. Generally, the fruited ones are going to be the biggest draws, but we see a lot of move when we have a West Coast style on. It definitely moves. Pilsners, they move. So it is really interesting to see the broad range of what people are interested in.
We're going to talk a little bit more about kind of that difference in the on-premise desires versus off-premise in a second. But Dino, Vitamin C is one of the newer, is I think the youngest one on this stage right now. You also named within the top 5 breweries in Massachusetts the other day by Boston.com. When you opened, there was already a bunch of competition in this style space. What did you have to do to really stand out?
Well, we had to copy everybody else, right? No. Kidding. Kind of. I think for us, the big thing was we focused on, that's what we were known for, right? We were known for our hazy IPAs when we were home brewing and basement brewing, whatever it was. And we were, the 5 years ago, 6-7 years ago was a really magical time in IPAs here, especially in New England, right? You had Vermont and Maine, and then you had Treehouse and Trillium, and it was like people were all looking for the next thing, and where do I not have to drive as far to? And I think we kind of checked that box, being on the South Shore, where people didn't have to drive 3-4 hours away to get it. And not that we're comparing ourselves to anyone else, but we made something that was comparable enough, I think. And I think for us too, having the taproom experience, which a lot of other people might not have had, or there was different things going on, and focusing also on that the hospitality aspect of it too. I think that's what back and tell their friends, and you got to go check this place out.
Yeah. Let's talk about the off-premise for a second. And we know most of the data about hazy IPAs because of scan data, because of what we're seeing in the off-premise. Naveen, Cloud Candy is Mighty Squirrel's top-selling beer in that space. It's been around for a minute now. How are you sustaining demand when we're seeing that there might be some of that leveling out or maturity in the market?
Actually, when we launched Cloud Candy 4 years back, at that time the ABV was 6.5%, and that ABV was, at least from a distribution perspective, was on the lower end of the spectrum for IPA.
Right.
Things have changed. Yeah, so actually, but at the same time, what I'm finding out actually is that actually in our tap room, when we release the lower ABV IPAs like 5.8 or 6, compared to releasing a new double IPA, those lower ABV IPAs now are significantly outselling any of the higher ABV IPAs. But in distribution, somehow actually it's cloud candy. I don't know. I think actually what happens is that when somebody comes to the tap room, they have made a decision to go to Mighty Squirrel. Now, when they are inside Mighty Squirrel, now they have a bit more time on their hand because they want to explore different options, right? And they're seeing what's new and what's exciting. And if there are two new things, they go for lower ABV IPA on that side, we have seen. But in distribution, once they walk into a superstore, any place they go, on average they have 345 beers in front of them. So sometimes it could be slightly intimidating, or sometimes they get like, you know what, listen, they want to play. They play more safe when they go out for retail compared to they become more adventurous when they come to the tap room. So in retail, somehow cloud candy is still majority of our sales, but in tap room, we are seeing that much different.
Yeah. Dino, you in Massachusetts at least are focused only on kind of your own premise sales. You're not going out to retailers. Why have you avoided that space for your home market?
Again, I think it's been part of just, we haven't had to, right? Like, we've been fortunate that people like to come and visit, and we built a beautiful space there. And again, I think focusing on that customer experience has been important for us, and I think even more so going forward, that's really the people that understand the hospitality aspect of this and understand that, yeah, the beer has to be great, but also it's about that customer experience, and it's about getting people to come in and tell people and bring them back, and I think that's super, super important. And then we've also, always had the problem of never having enough beer too, I guess. So that kind of stalled things for us as well.
Kimberly, for Wormtown, what are you seeing consumers are asking for in the off-premise, specifically when it comes to like package or ABV? What does that look like?
Everyone wants a 19.2 over 8%. I mean, that's what we're seeing, those high ABV beers, but they want their bang for their buck. They want to take their cans and they want to go home. So the higher the ABV and the bigger the vessel, they feel like they're getting that, what they're looking for. We also see a lot of demand for the variety pack, and we've just launched one of our first variety packs. Our second one is on the way out, and that's actually a fun way for us to take some of the beers that did pretty well in our tap room, because we've got those people who are coming in and they're telling us, hey, we really like this. Okay, well, now it's easy for us to put in a 12-ounce can, throw it in a mix pack, and see how those do and see what that feedback is as well. But in your tap room, those people are in front of you. You have face-to-face contact. You can get the information directly from the consumer without having to go through, second and third parties to know what that customer wants. So the second, out of our first variety pack, we were able to isolate one of those beers that could stand next to Be Hoppy on the shelf, whether it's a 19.2 or another, 16 ounce or what comes out of that. In our second variety pack, we were able to put in a bunch of different styles. Again, a range of IPA, the different styles of IPAs, tropicals and high ABVs and whatnot. And then we get to see what comes out of that as well. So we have a little bit of a way to figure out through our tap room, but also through the consumer base. We can play and have fun, but yeah, we definitely know that everyone wants a 19.2 at 8% or more. Maybe 9%, I don't know. Not me though.
We have an audience question that speaks to something we were talking about earlier before we started. I'm going to paraphrase a little bit here, but New England IPAs are sometimes, I don't want to say looked down upon, but aren't as appreciated as much by people who are in the industry, where you want to drink some other things, maybe some lagers, some pilsners in there. Do you feel that the New England IPA is more of a money grab, or do you feel the style is an important part of beer history now? Any takers?
I'm not touching this one.
I'll take it. At least I'll start the home team right now. I'll admit, when I was originally in the camp of hazy IPA is lazy IPA, and this is before I started working on it. So this was a very long time ago, because the examples were hit or miss. And once I started working on the project with Jim's direction, you remember. I started to really realize just how difficult they were to make and to make well. So it actually, just from getting to know what I understood the style to be at the time, getting to know it better, it actually developed my respect for the style quite a bit. So examples that are well made, I think have really, they have defined a category. They have evolved from, they haven't made they haven't made West Coast style IPA obsolete at all. I think they have, clearly evolved into, a unique standalone category, whether you call it IPA or not. However, if you don't want to use that same designation, it is its own very clear style. And I think it really has, it's not just a grab. We're looking at probably near 10 years into when people started really talking about East Coast style IPAs as a thing. And they're still here, and they are evolving. So I think it is clearly its own style that's still evolving, but it's not going away.
Any other thoughts? That was pretty well said. So. Thank you. Well done tackling that question. Let's move on to the on-premise for a second, or to your own premise as well. Naveen mentioned that there's a difference between what he's seeing in off-premise demand versus on-premise demand. Are you all seeing that difference as well?
Definitely. We have a lot of people who come to our tap room and they want those pilsners, those kolsches, that, those light crispy beers, and then we send them out into the wild and they flop. And we're like, wait, why? Why is this happening? So it's definitely a different type of consumer, but also those consumers who come into our tap room, they're not committing to a 4-pack. They're not committing to a 12-pack. They're not committing to even a 6-pack. They're committing to 6 ounces, 8 ounces, maybe a 12 ounce. So their confidence level is high because they're maybe only, if they don't like it, it's $8 compared to maybe more than double, or having this beer that's taking up precious fridge space, or they could be bringing home a beer that they enjoyed. So I think that they're definitely more adventurous. They're more confident in what they're able to get. Also, they can get a flight. Flights are a great way for the consumers to be able to try out anything, and then sometimes when they go back, they'll grab a whole 16 ounce or whatever. But then once they see it in the store, oh, I had that was good, and they remember it. And it's also about sending brand ambassadors out into the world and kind of like getting people feet on the street, kind of a little bit grassroots. There is a lot of people who come to tap rooms specifically to try something new, but when you have like Wormtown, we have both tap rooms and we have grocery stores and liquor stores and all over the place. So getting some grassroots people out on the street, that's definitely helpful for us too. But the tap room has a very, very different demand for sure.
Dino, are you seeing that? I mean, you are not in distro in Massachusetts, but what does that demand look like in your locations?
Well, I think for us, like we have a small pilot system, which is great, and it allows us to be creative. I mean, I'm not going to make 30 barrels of a marshmallow lager, but I might take a chance with 1 or 2 barrels, right? Yeah. So I think having that flexibility allows us to really test things, get them in the tap room, really see the consumer response to it and say, all right, yeah, this is something that we want to scale up and package and get out in the wild.
Naveen, is there a particular balance that you found of how many hazy or New England IPAs you should have on tap, or what diversity you should have on the menu?
Actually, the tap room, right?
Yeah.
Tap room, again, it's a whole different place from distribution. But in tap room right now, we have 20 beers exactly on the menu, out of which 5 are IPAs, 15 are other things. And in tap room, the customers will try everything which you make. They will love it. But the moment you sell it out for distribution, somehow actually the people, at least in our case, we have seen that people still gravitate towards in distribution. They want to buy the IPAs. Last year we got the gold medal in GABF for the Oktoberfest. In distribution, it's cloud candy. Yeah, doesn't matter. Gold medal, yeah, great, but distribution is all cloud candy. Yeah, no, we sent out the beers, but yeah. So tap room people are more creative, more so in much more than in distribution.
We also see, for us in the downtown tap room, we also see, you're definitely a lot more creative. We actually probably have fewer IPAs on than that, and they're not always going to all be hazy. We may have 3 to 4, among the 20 lines. We definitely see a huge movement, at our location on the lighter beers. On surprisingly, light lager is not a surprise, but But even like a malty beer. We haven't had the Boston Brick Red on for a little while, and I hear it all the time from people walking in asking, like, where is it? They're so disappointed that isn't there, because that is, it's one of those hallmark beers. But it's a multi unique experience. So we see a good amount of movement on kind of the uncomplicated beers as well, too. Like, those will really just fly. Anytime there's a Pilsner, gone in 60 seconds. But also some of our really experimental beers, will fly at that same rate.
Kimberly, this question also ties into an audience question, but how much does the feedback that you're getting from the on-premise and what people are drinking there impact the off-premise decisions that Wormtown's making?
The feedback that we get in the tap room is really important to what we decide to do. It really does help us to figure out what direction the customer wants, because obviously that's why we're here. We want to give customers the beer that they want to drink. So being able to test that out in our tap room, we hear you. We want to listen to you, because we obviously don't want to put a beer out there that nobody's going to drink. So when we hear more of those hazies and more, whatever that customers, consumers wanting sours or whatnot, we definitely take that back to our brewers. Our brewers will experiment. Some R&D goes on. We have a pilot system over at Foxborough, so we can do some of those smaller batches that Dino was also saying. So we can build something, brew something, and put it out to the tap room and see if it really does stick. We're lucky in that manner where we can experiment that way, put it in the tap room, and get direct feedback. And that direct feedback does go directly to our brewers, and they take that feedback and they play with it. So yeah, it's really important to have the consumer giving us what they want, for sure.
If I can add something.
Of course.
You want a humbling experience, put Blue Spirulina in a double IPA. And I'll tell you, if you don't listen to the feedback after that, you're in the wrong business. So, short of death threats, you definitely you want to listen to the consumer.
They're passionate people. Sticking with you for a second, Dino, just looking at some of the things that you have on tap right now, a lot of your IPAs are within that 7 to 8% range, but you also have a 4.5% sessional IPA going on right now. Are consumers asking for those kind of lower APA, either New England or hazy IPAs?
Yeah, with tap rooms coming back, people want to be able to spend more time there. And, you come in and you drink a 8-9%, you're good. But with the 4.5%, people can have a couple of them, still feel pretty good, and kind of go on their merry way, and they're okay, So yeah, we're definitely, things are creeping down, 4, 3.5, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Are you all also seeing some sort of shifts in what people are looking for in ABV? Naveen, you want to start?
Yeah, just one thing which we have noticed is that they want lower ABV, but they want IPA. They don't want session IPA. Or if, for heaven's sake, I can have a 5.3% IPA, sells like awesome, right? If I have a 5.6% pale ale, nope. Session IPA might, especially the thing is and customers have become much more open to the idea of calling it IPA and having lower ABV. But yeah, like they want the word IPA, not session IPA, but full IPA, but have lower ABV. But the lowest I've gone for is like 5.7. I haven't tried beyond underneath that, yeah, but.
We definitely see a draw towards the lower ABV beers. That doesn't mean the higher aren't moving as well, too, but there's definitely, especially this time of year and at the taproom setting, people do want to drink. They want to have that sessionable experience. They still want a lot of flavor, but they want to be able to sit there for 3 or 4 beers and then be able to get up and then enjoy the rest of their day or evening. So we do see a lot, even with the hoppy beers. We have a hazy session on right now that's 4.5%, and that moves very well. If you can, if you reach the right people at the right moment, some of it depends on luck and timing and who's just walked in the door as well, too, and what they're looking for.
Just going to echo everything that they just said. They either want high ABV in a big vessel, or they want low ABV and don't call it a session, I guess, because that kind of they don't want to hear that. But yeah, we definitely see the same exact thing, whether it's out in the wild or right in our own tap room.
Just one more thing to add actually on that is going to be, I think it might depend on the location of the brewery also, or tap room. Because actually in our case, we are in Waltham, so we attract a lot of families and a lot of people who are they want to stay there for a few hours, right? Actually, and and they want to be able to drive back in a sane way, right? So they, in general, we have triple IPAs, but they don't sell much in our space. They want to have a lower ABV beer, enjoy a few for 2-3 hours, and drive back. So audience also matters. But maybe if I'm opening in downtown with next to a college place, then it might be a different situation there.
We have another audience question that's a little bit spicy. And I'm going to paraphrase this one too, but they're talking about how, New England IPA, should it even really be considered a real IPA? Has it confused consumers, and when they order one, they're expecting this sort of hazy thing and get confused when they get that clear beer or beverage? The question is, should we maybe try to educate the consumer more, or consider renaming, or at least properly calling it a New England IPA to start to teach consumers the difference?
You want me to do this one? All right. I think what we do, a good part of it is educating the consumer. We can't just assume that everybody walks in the door has had these types of beers before, and I think that goes again back to the hospitality aspect of it. I think we have to do that. We can't just assume that everybody knows what they're drinking. Everybody has that aha moment, and it'd be great to be able to educate them so that they can appreciate it and not feel intimidated and want to enjoy these types of beers. I don't think they should, stop making them because of that. That's ridiculous. I'd be out of business.
Anyone else have anything to add?
And this comes back to history, history and styles and expectations. But a lot of the people that we do see that are gravitated towards the hazy style of IPA are not traditional IPA drinkers. So they're maybe newer to beer, newer to craft beer, especially, and newer to these flavor profiles. So, they're not necessarily confused as long as we clarify. I don't just lump everything into an IPA as an IPA as an IPA, because they're not anymore. It is not one definable category. There are subcategories. There are ever-growing subcategories at this point of what we in the brewing world identify as falling into India Pale Ale of some sort. So as long as we identify them clearly, it is kind of up to us too to still continue educating as well, like Dino said.
So in the last a little under 10 minutes left here, let's talk about what comes next. And I know we can't all predict the future, but one of the things that we've heard Bart Watson from the BA talk about a lot is the best way to gauge what the next trend could be is look at what the youngest legal drinking age consumers are drinking. Have any of you noticed that demographic? Do they care about this type of beer style? What are they looking for? Should we expect this to continue with them?
So the one thing which we have observed is that we can speak all about the notes of the beer, the aromas and everything else, but the newer generation, it has to be more on the face. If we have they might be more inclined towards having a grapefruit IPA or a pineapple IPA compared to having IPA with pineapple and papaya notes. We made a beer called as the Grove Shack, which was with the blood orange, and that beer was released in January, in the worst month, but it just flew away, that beer in distribution. And yeah, so actually, calling out the adding the fruits and calling out the fruits on the brand name goes at least so far from n equal to 1 worked out really well.
I think I would second that. We see fruit as a definite big trend, and not just the implied fruit from hops anymore. The actual fruits, and not the traditional citrus that we've associated with a lot of hop type characteristics. But we see a lot of the, not just milkshake, but just but fruits added in really are a very big mover, and that seems to kind of track with a younger generation that has grown up drinking a lot of sweeter drinks. You see it in a lot of the other drink choices that they make. The other alcoholic beverages aside from beer tend to be sweeter, tend to be and that makes them a lot easier drinking. So whether it is low alcohol, higher alcohol, they can enjoy the process and the experience, I think, a little more easily. At least that's what it seems. So that seems to be, you know, an evolving trend with the newer to craft beer drinker, at least.
Any different opinions, or this is pretty much on track with everybody?
On track with everyone, but we've seen a little bit of shift in the younger drinker alone not wanting to come out. And a lot of people who turned 21 during COVID, they had to take their beer and go home. So we're getting different feedback because we don't have that younger person sitting in our tap room enjoying. When I turned 21, I was like, I am going out. You know, that's where we wanted to be. We wanted to be seen drinking. People are grabbing their 4-packs. There's a lot of brand loyalty too. They're drinking what their older friends were drinking. They're drinking what they've seen on social media. They're drinking what, you know, maybe not what their parents are drinking, but they're drinking what their older friends are drinking. You know, we're in the city, so we have a lot of, like, people can walk, you can Uber to the tap room, stuff like that, but people are also going around the corner to their, you know, favorite liquor store, and they're grabbing that 4-pack and they're heading home. So it's a little bit harder to gauge some of that information now because they're not comfortable coming out yet, and hopefully we'll see them come back at the tap rooms, come to life and whatnot. But for now, you know, it's the younger demographics, we're not seeing them as much as we were expecting to, or when I was 21, which was forever ago. So
I think a couple things is obviously lower and no ABV beer is obviously growing in popularity. And like what Kim was saying, as far as just the easily having this stuff accessible, they want to have a knock on the window and open it up and somebody's there to deliver their beer for them. They don't want to come out. And then also, you know, obviously we've seen cocktails on the rise and spirits have continued to grow. And, you know, is there a way to capture that in these fruited beers where we can recreate these classic cocktails, but doing them in a beer format?
Final question here. Are we going to have to start caring about IBUs again? Are consumers going to be shifting that pendulum back?
The one thing which we have seen in our tap room is that we launched the Pacific Coast Time, which is a West Coast IPA. I came here from San Diego before, so I love those, and it did really well. It did really well. It was 7.2%, which is a high ABV for most any IPAs, but it was Pacific Coast Time and it's a West Coast IPA, and it was nothing as on your face as my favorite beers from you know, like a Stone or from somebody else, but still it was really well received. So go figure, right? On one side we keep saying that they want to have the juicy New England IPA, but at the same time, if you have out of 5 IPAs, you have one West Coast IPA. Somehow, at least in the tap room, they were like, wow, they did really well.
for us, Be Hoppy is West Coast, and that is our flagship, and that beer sells like crazy. So I definitely see that people are looking for maybe that higher IBU and maybe that crispier West Coast style citrusy flavor. Is it the color of the beer that drives people towards, the East Coast style, whatnot? I don't know for sure, but people are definitely wanting flavor, whether it's that bitter flavor or that fruity flavor. They want flavorful beers. They don't want just watered down flat flavor. They want complexity. They want the diversity in their beers, and you can definitely, the consumer is very loud about that.
Megan, you're going to start focusing more on those IBUs?
I don't think that the IBU wars probably aren't coming back like that. We're not going to see the wars coming back, but definitely a focus on bitterness that means something too, because our hazy styles, they have plenty of BUs if you look at them analytically, but there's still something very experiential that's different with a West Coast style IPA that's also very pleasant. You've got to find that balance, make that experience, and there is still a very good market for that.
You cranking them up at all, do you know?
A little bit. I feel like we've let California creep back into this thing, and we need to stand fast and keep the wall. But no, listen, we brewed 100 IBU beer back in the spring, and thankfully it's gone. But I'm really torn, and there's not enough time for all this. But I think there definitely has a place in the market, and I enjoy drinking them myself, but I also have to remember that there's that person that still comes in and says, I hate IPAs, what do you have? And you hand them a New England IPA, and they're like, I love this, what is it? And it's an IPA. So I'm torn.
So what we've learned from this discussion is maybe we need to focus more on being Massachusetts and get California out of here a little bit. That's what my lesson is. I think that's it for our panel. Can we give a round of applause for our panelists? Thank you guys so much. So we are going to be having a little bit of a networking break right now. So get up, stretch your legs, get a beer. We have food. Please eat the food. And then make sure you're back in your seats by 4:45, and we'll start up for our second and final panel of the day.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Brew Talks, presented by Dogfish Head and sponsored by the Reyes Beer Division. I'm your host, Justin Kindle. We are live in Boston at the Samuel Adams Brewery in Jamaica Plain. This is our second conversation. We've got a great panel here. We're going to dive into the state of the industry, and let's introduce our guests. Starting on the end, we have Andrea Starr from Total Wine and More. Thanks for being here, Andrea. We also have Sam Calagione, the co-founder of Dogfish Head. What's up, Sam? Also joining us is Kristen Burke, the Chief Corporate Growth Officer for Burke Distributing. Thanks for being here, Kristen. She has her own cheering section.
Fave.
Yeah. And finally, last but not least, is Dave Williams, Bump Williams Consulting's VP of Analytics and Insights. Thanks for being here, Dave.
Thanks for having me, Justin.
So we're going to do something a little different for Brew Talks. We're going to have Dave start us off with an overview of Bump Williams Consulting's 3-tier survey of brewers, distributors, and retailers on their growth priorities and strategies, and where they converge and where they diverge. So take it away, Dave.
Well, thank you, Justin. Hey, everybody. So I'll just jump right into it because I don't want to take up too much of your time with this opening. But every year, BWC conducts a survey across our 3-tier partners. We ask them just a simple question. What are your strategies for growth for the upcoming year? Now, we know that growth can mean different things to different people, right? More sales, bigger in size, bigger in awareness, maybe more efficient. But whatever your end goal is, what strategies are you going to implement to achieve said goals? We take all the feedback back from each of the tiers, distill it down, and create some top 10-ish lists across each of those individual tiers in the business. And then the fun starts, right? So the first thing we look at is overlap across these growth strategies across each of the tiers. Now, inherently, the way these businesses are set up, there's not going to be 100% overlap. There are going to be unique strategies to each. But when there is that overlap, that brings me joy because that means that there is common thinking when it comes to striving for growth for the upcoming year. On the flip side of the coin, though, when there is little to no overlap, well, that makes me a little bit concerned because although everybody is trying to grow, they're kind of rowing in separate directions when it comes to achieving that growth. So you wonder about how that's going to be achieved. The next thing that we like to look at, though, is change. How have these strategies changed year to year? And that's what we're here to really talk about today. As the landscape evolves, as consumers evolve, so do growth strategies. Some of those evolve out of foresight, some of those evolve out of sheer necessity. But there's always going to be a little bit of change. And what I distilled down was some of the top 3 growth strategies for each tier that we're seeing today for 2023, but also into 2024 until those strategies come in and inevitably change a little bit too. And what do we have to think about when it comes to growth and overlap or divergence across the 3-tier? On the retailer side of things, we're seeing a lot of allocation shifting when it comes to space. Space dedicated more to the fast-moving areas. Flavors, ready-to-drink, mostly spirits-based cocktails, where legal, and then imports. There are obviously exceptions to that space shift, but when you see space shifting one direction to another, someone's gaining, someone's losing, and how does that impact your strategy when the axe might be coming your way? The other thing we see is an expansion of single serve. Now, single serve is not a new concept to beer, but this new wave has a bit of a different look. Different shoppers, different occasions, different price points, and it's an incremental occasion. That means it's mostly in addition to what other consumers are buying in the stores. So there's going to be expansion on that side as well. And then finally, we talk about efficiency and variety on the retail side. Maybe not about adding more to satisfy variety, but being a bit smarter about how to check a lot of boxes from an attribute perspective while maintaining a tight shelf set and thinking about velocity. In the middle tier, a lot of growth strategies we're looking at changing is the service model evolution. How do you address an area where you need to be more hands-on, and where can you afford to be a bit more hands-off? And how does that impact you as a supplier when your strategy requires maybe a more hands-on approach? The other thing we're looking at is portfolio evolution, looking beyond just beer. And I don't mean beyond beer, I mean past beer, maybe past beverage alcohol, maybe past beverages in general. What else is going on those trucks that's going to allocate resources and keep the pipeline of growth flowing for a distributor, and how does that impact a beer supplier in said house? And then finally, on the wholesale side, it wouldn't be 2023 if I didn't mention M&A. Anytime there's volatility in the industry, a lot of eyes open up, right? Not how can I take advantage of this, but how can I grow through this? Maybe that's acquiring, maybe that's consolidating, or maybe that's exiting, whatever that strategy is. And again, how does that impact you if you're on the supplier side of the coin? And then finally, we come down to the brewers. The first thing we see about change for this year for brewers and looking ahead is approach to retail and chains. I think 2020 opened up a lot of eyes into the value of having a direct pipeline to your consumers, a reliable pipeline through the 3-tier system. But a lot of other people are thinking the same thing. So it's not just chain approach, it's how you're going to go about achieving that approach and staying on the shelf. On top of that, we saw a lot of self-reflection being mentioned as a strategy for growth. Looking at portfolio, looking at tactics, looking at footprint. Maybe contraction is a growth strategy, but it's a lot of self-reflection, looking in the mirror as what brewers are thinking about, or manufacturers, I should say, are thinking about moving forward. And then ultimately, the last point here is alternative dollar ventures. Being maybe a bit more willing and open to look outside the box of your core competencies when it comes to seeking out incrementality or incremental dollars. Bigger portfolio, different footprint, different approach. I think the receptiveness there ties into growth in looking ahead for where you can possibly find that incrementality as a supplier. So I know I rattled off quite a few things. I'm sure we're going to cover a lot of other growth strategies in this panel.
Check. Okay, we're back. All right. So I'm going to answer that like from a company perspective and from a Dogfish brand perspective. If that's all right, Justin. So I'll kind of use the rules of 3. So to some of what Dave was saying, it's tumultuous times, and picking the priorities that are going to like run through all 3 tiers gracefully is critical. And so being more judicious with innovations is a part of that. And we are proudly a portfolio company, which we're at a moment like this when customers, consumers, beverage lovers are looking for choice. We feel at BBC we've got something for everyone, but we do have like priorities. And from a BBC-wide perspective, rules of 3, right now, if you look at our priorities beyond beer, they are clearly, truly, both malt and spirits, Twisted Tea, which volumetrically is our growth engine right now, and Dogfish spirits-based canned cocktails. Nationally, those are 3. If you look at BBC-wide from a beer perspective, beer's our middle name. It'll never change. I don't know if Jim's still here, but he was drinking beer the whole time. He was here earlier tonight. That will never change. So top 3 beer priorities, Sam Adams, Dogfish, and our taproom environment. The last panel did a great job of talking about how they use their smaller systems to innovate, in a way that does not disrupt the marketplace in their 3-tier suppliers. Innovate in a small space, incubate, give it oxygen, test it, and then bring it to market. That's what this place, I'm looking over the brewers of JP right now, and that's what a place like this, or our Coney Island, or our Angel City, or our Dogfish locations are all about. And then lastly, growth priorities for Dogfish brand specifically, rules of 3. In terms of what's driving growth, number 1 would be canned cocktails for us. Number 2 would be sort of, I'd call them off-centered beers. I'm holding our biggest growth driver right now, which is Citrus Squall, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And number 3 would be IPAs. So volumetrically still, Dogfish majority IPAs, 60 minutes down a little bit, 90 minutes up a little bit, but those are essentially our growth drivers.
Andrea, at total, what are the growth priorities at this point in mid-year?
Sure. So we have seen a huge shift into what we call hard beverage, so the FMBs, seltzers, including spirits-based, et cetera. So a huge shift into that, especially as we're in the warmer months. So for us, it's really looking forward and thinking about what we're going to see and how that's going to impact our fall and holiday business. So if you look at our craft business, we are down a little bit, but really when you dive in, it's all about the seasonals are a little bit stagnant, and we're seeing that go into the hard beverage portion of our business. So as we look to fall and holiday, historically some of the really big craft times of year, how does hard beverage play a part? Does craft really come back into the picture, or do the bottled RTDs start to take on a new personality? What really happens with the mix shift as we go down the road into the holiday seasons?
So at the midway point of the year, Kristen, for Burke Distributing, how have the growth priorities shifted?
I would say we always focus on portfolio, people, and process. So from a portfolio standpoint, Boston, although it's a small city, is incredibly diverse. So ensuring you have the right product in the right place, in the right city, in the right account, or right town, right account, to ensure that you're reaching the proper consumer for the brand. That's always going to be a focus for us. The shift might change, but that's always the priority. From a people standpoint, for Q1 and Q2, we were still trying to work up to being fully staffed. We're finally getting fully staffed, which is really allowing our people to do what they're supposed to do, which is sell. And we're so fortunate that in Boston, we really over-index with amazing supplier partners, with people on the street to help us. So hopefully now we can kind of continue to grow and continue to sell instead of having to do other jobs. From a process standpoint, that would be about service. So just continuing to service every single day, being everywhere, ensuring that we can get those jump balls, because our goal is to out-service.
So we have a text line, and that is 617-336-8560, 617-336-8560. If you have questions out there, send them in. This is a State of the Industry panel, and it's a Brew Talks Day, so of course there's chaos in the market. And that starts with Anchor Brewing. They're ceasing production. The business is being liquidated. Sam, as we sit here, in this moment, with an iconic brand basically being folded, or, it's going to have a new owner, the IP will at some point, I would imagine. What does this say to you? What is the lesson that we learned from this at this point?
I think the biggest lessons is it kind of draws into focus to an amplified degree how it's kind of a quickly accelerating into a bifurcated marketplace. Either, and Dave talked about, some breweries' strategic model is actually receding geographically to focus on their home markets, and also look at their state's laws to potentially maximize their ability to sell direct to consumer, versus those that are, call it now, top 20 IRI defined craft. And that middle space is really challenging. And even just 5 years ago, to think a brand as iconic and durable as Anchor would be challenged to the degree that we found out today would have seemed unthinkable. And I suppose that's kind of the reasons for that, I think, are twofold. The younger drinker might not be coming in, is definitely not coming into alcohol through craft to the degree they were 10 years ago, and they're going to, call it Beyond Beer. We'll get into that a little bit later. Or the younger drinker is supporting taproom breweries, or they're supporting top 10, top 20 IRI defined that they see on a C-store shelf or on a stack at a top 20 volume retailer. It's really challenging to be in that, call it 20,000 to 200,000 barrel range that's relying majority on outside your state for sales. And I think today was the biggest wake-up call to just how quickly it's bifurcating.
Kristen, when you see a legacy brand like that go through hard times and, essentially pull from the market, how does that shape your view of craft at this point?
I don't think craft is going anywhere. I think the struggle distributors have is balancing, they're our partners. We're a representation of those brands, but at the end of the day, it's your baby that we're representing, and we want to do the absolute best that we can. It's not something we ever want to see. And I think it's something we just have to all work together to try to shift away from, but I don't think that's a representation of the category as a whole.
I'd like to get the retail perspective as well, Andrea. How does that shape your view of craft?
So as I mentioned earlier, the craft business for us really is what's suffering is the seasonal. And again, and when you dig down deeper, what Sam mentioned, it's kind of that mid-tier, those regional breweries that are having the biggest challenges. And when we talk to those breweries, a lot of times it does seem that they don't quite know what direction to look and how to proceed. And what we always like to tell them is, know yourself. How did you get where you got, right? Like, you had something special and people liked that. So you have to kind of look back to your roots. And I heard somebody on the earlier panel say, do what you do best. So I think really just kind of doing some self-reflection and seeing how you can, recapture that magic and what's really going to work for you and your brewery and what makes you special and stand out from the crowd.
I just want to put a point. I'm looking at my wife, Mariah. We got a good friend, Matt DeSab, who owns a little restaurant group in coastal Delaware, and he's got a great entrepreneurial statement, which every entrepreneur is sick of the statement when they're in their business environment. Do you know what you should do? Everyone's always telling you, do you know what you should do? And his answer is to say, yes, I do, and walk away before they say what they should. And to your point, I think those mid-size beverage makers are under siege because they're not growing, and so they've got the distributors, their own coworkers, et cetera, saying, do you know what we should do? Do you know what we should do? And oftentimes what they're looking to is IRI trends or what the bigger guys are doing, whereas maybe they should be more stoic on why they decide to go on that entrepreneurial journey and be themselves. So I appreciate what you just said there.
I like to call that chasing the ball. I recently adopted a son and have had the pleasure of watching youth soccer. They all just keep chasing the ball. So that's what I like to akin that to.
Love that. Dave, how are we seeing this for the mid-sized breweries play out in the numbers as far as distribution goes?
I think everybody's kind of hit it spot on. That's a soft spot. When we're looking at the numbers, and I can see even stability in national distribution or market distribution, stability is a win right now because that squeeze is coming for craft overall. And you look down that list of top 25, you can bring it down to top 50, top 100. More are down than are up. So that tells me that nobody is immune. But if you do have a focused approach, if you do have clear priorities, and you can actually execute on those priorities, that allows you to somewhat stand above while everyone else, for lack of a better word, is floundering right now.
So one of the things that I also want to hit on with you, Dave, is we know that there's a lot of upheaval in the market. You see it in the Bud Light numbers each week in scans and the off-premise data. One of the things that your dad mentioned recently was that retailers are beginning to do summer reevaluations of shelf sets. And I'm curious to know, how is that playing out and what opportunities is that potentially creating for the other breweries out there?
So I think some of these summer reevaluations should have been spring reevaluations. It just got delayed. But I think a lot of them are also, summer is the time for beer sales, right? Highest weeks, most popular holidays, a lot of eyes and attention on it. So I think it's only wise that retailers take a look at how focus and space is being allocated to the movers and the shakers, right? You want to maximize this short window of time you have when there's a big event going on. For craft specifically, I think if you look across some of the major classes of trade, there's some ups and downs in there. In grocery, we're seeing craft numbers dwindle in terms of SKUs and brands that are being sold and scanned at retail. But in this back half through Q2, trends have actually stabilized a bit. We're seeing velocity flatten out and start to creep back up on a per item basis. So this assessment or evaluation is starting to pay off, and hopefully that leads to growth and snowball effect in the future. In convenience, I think that channel in general has evolved their look to better cater to how consumers of beer or beverage alcohol shop today in general. And craft has been a massive beneficiary of that. We've seen average items jump in C-store. Yes, a good amount is single serve, but not all. Craft brewers in general are seeing that now as a viable outlet, and retailers are seeing craft as a viable segment when it comes to incrementality and meeting what the consumers are looking for. So I think market to market, channel to channel, retailer to retailer, that narrative is going to differ a bit. But I think any time that there's eyes on the assortment and willingness to make a shift, just be prepared to jump on that or jump up for that jump ball. Have a plan, have proof to support your plan, and come prepared for anyone that asks you, hey, we've got an opening coming up. What do you got for us?
Kristen, how do you see those tremors sort of playing out in this market?
Well, so Boston as a whole is about flat. On-premise is up about 9 or 10%, and the off-premise is down around 5%. The on-premise, that's a bit misleading just because we had some COVID mask restrictions going on in Q1 and Q2, whereas the off-premise, that's pretty stable and where it's going. So I think as you look at what we're trying to, basically, yeah, that's where we're at, sorry.
What about, I got a question there, because it is a unique market, how much draft craft beer over indexes.
Yes.
Can you talk about your ratios on that?
Absolutely. So our on-premise is about 50, it's 50% draft, and of that draft, it's 50% craft. So craft is absolutely critical for us. So craft draft is something we're very bullish on, and something we're going to continue to fully commit on no matter what. It's critical to win.
Andrea, as we see a lot of upheaval in the marketplace in totals, you're everywhere, just about. So, how is that playing out across your stores?
So we do have stores in a variety of markets, and every market and really every store has its own personality. So it's hard to say globally, but generally we do see, again, craft is, still has its place, and we just have to continue to look at what's happening and adjust and shift as we can. As much as I would like, to snap my fingers and have the shelves reset and, things respaced as the, sales trends change week to week, we can't do that. So we kind of have to take a step back and look at what the larger trends in the industry are, and then what we're seeing in those each individual stores and markets. And through our refresh process, make sure that we're making those changes accordingly. And then when there's something really disruptive that happens, being able to react quickly. So I think if you are familiar with our stores, you've likely seen over the last year and a half a big change in how we set our, our seltzers, our canned cocktails, et cetera. That was an intentional move, and we did that outside of our normal processes because we knew we had to make a change in that space. And then something else that we're really looking closely at is our non-alcoholic space and how that's working. And really, as craft is maybe a little bit down, if you lump in craft non-alc, you're really in a great position.
Kristen, I want to circle back to the draft question, and I don't want to put you on too much on the spot, but we talked a little bit about the number of draft beer drinking accounts that there are fewer of in Massachusetts now. Yep. How many fewer are there?
So we have about 17 less buying accounts on the on-premise from today to pre-COVID. Now that 17% is a net, so that's the closings and the openings. But the problem is what was involved within those closings are the whiskeys of the world that had 24 draft lines. Those are no longer, they were getting replenished by accounts that are more food-centric or cocktail-centric. So, and with the accounts that stayed, the ones that had 12 draft handles, mostly have 8. So also the consumer is a bit more promiscuous in the way that they're going to be drinking a beer, a cocktail, and maybe a glass of wine. However, I think all of that, there's a lot of optimism within it because I think some of those are triggered by some of the labor issues that are happening. So the bartender, who's the one that's selling the craft beer and can romance and tell your story, they're also the busser, the bar back, taking orders, delivering food. And as the labor market starts to try to find some equilibrium there, I think there's a lot more opportunity and you're going to start seeing a lot more momentum with that craft draft.
Sam, one of the things you mentioned was the Citrus Squall is your growth driver, and that beer is overperforming on draft and in 19.2s, and you're holding a 12-ounce can, but it's underperforming in 6-packs. What does that...
I'm trying to help that performance of 6-pack.
And if you all could help him out as well, that would help as well. But what does that say about the market that we're in at this point?
Well, I would say, first of all, finding white space is a lot more difficult today in a world of 9,000 breweries, much less, a world where craft beer is not growing and Beyond Beer is. And for us at Dogfish, we kind of were a Beyond Beer company before that was a category. Like our whole mission when we opened was we committed to brewing the majority of every recipe we made outside the Reinheitsgebot using culinary ingredients like Aprihop, our first, fruit-infused IPA in '97, and then opening our distillery over 20 years ago and kind of taking that, that knowledge set and applying it back and forth from the world of distilling and brewing. And as we came in this moment, we were, thinking, hey, maybe we can work hard as on-prem comes back, as Kristen was talking about, to kind of create a Trojan horse where the average person coming out of COVID, that's young legal drinking, i.e. volume drinking age, maybe came into their, legal drinking age not focused on craft beer, but focused more on seltzers, cocktails, full-proof spirits, and say, hey, let's take all of our experience in cocktails and bring it into something that can be super approachable on the draft side, and yet have an equal kind of perfect storm of craft beer DNA, golden ale DNA, and true cocktail DNA. So the perfect storm, the Citrus Squall name is about that. It's like, double-digit percentage of the fermentables from agave, double-digit percentable of the fermentables is from grapefruit juice. So it has as much, cocktail character as it does beer. But in terms of package performance, we researched it and we trialed it and evolved it. It used to be called Tupilia because we really wanted to drive the phonetic association to tequila. And then we trialed that in our own properties for 2 years, dialed in the recipe. And once we had it super drinkable, we're like, now we'll bother our 3-tier partners with it after we took 2 years honing it, perfecting the messaging and the recipe, and then launched it in like February. And we've already had to, reorder tap handles, the bright, beautiful pink tap handles twice. And it kind of feels like, late 90s again. It feels good to grow a brand on premise one pint at a time. A lot of the brands that have been launched from, spirits-based RTDs to seltzers, they grew off premise. And the craft beer phenomena, renaissance, grew on premise. So this one feels really good where it's over-indexing on premise. My wife and I are going to go embarrass our daughter and order a round of beers at Seaport Social, a great account that Kate and Kristen and the team open in downtown Boston, where our daughter is a waitress tonight, and it's selling really well there, on draft. So 19.2s of this beer overperforming, draft overperforming, but yeah, 6-packs are not where we want them yet. So net, it's higher, it's bigger volume than we wanted, but I think we have to be concerned if we can't also make it work in traditional off-prem packages to the degree that we forecasted 6-packs, 12-packs, etc.
Andrea, we hear a lot about 19.2s, we hear a lot about variety 12s. How do those packages perform at total? And, is that shift mix changes up? How do you sort of reallocate for that?
Yeah, so mixed variety 12s are up. They're doing wonderful, and I think just some of the better performing ones are ones that customers aren't going to have that leftover beer in the fridge, right? So the IPA mix packs do really well. The packs with something special in it do really well. So we love those. In terms of space, if you're familiar with our stores, our shelves are very fluid. So within the craft areas of the stores, there's a lot of room to give and take, and we do add items every day. We also discontinue items every day. So there's a lot of in and out when you look at our stores. And in terms of 19.2s, it is something that we are definitely talking about, looking at. It's certainly a C-store package right now. And in terms of that sort of package, what we've traditionally thought is that it needs to be sold cold, and cold space is at a premium for us. But it's definitely something we're really diving into and thinking about how we might be able to take advantage of that 19.2 and what it means to the current consumer.
Kristen, how is Burke approaching the sea change with those packages?
Yeah, so 19.2s have always been an opportunity for us. Boston is over-indexes in all liquor licenses and not just beer and wine. We only have about 100 beer and wine liquor stores where everything else is all liquor. And so they've always been a challenge for us because we're fighting the nip. And I don't know if you guys have walked around Boston, but there are nips quite literally everywhere. So I think as we look at 19.2s, we were really looking at being targeted in our approach as to absolutely owning those wine and the beer and wine accounts, and then targeting the correct accounts where we can try to really fight the nip as we look forward through this.
So I don't want to throw everybody into an existential crisis, but here's an audience question. the current 21 to 25-year-old consumer is the first generation in the craft business whose parents were craft beer drinkers. Traditionally, kids drink differently than their parents. How does craft combat that? I guess we'll start with you, Sam.
Okay. All right. How do we combat that? How do
By triple fist.
As I triple fist, yeah, I can get rid of this. So I would say, how do we combat that? I would say to just make sure we make beer fun, and to try and make beers that can appeal to people of all ages, and not be like, this is our beer for old people. We did a beer called OK Boomer, and we got more shit. I would just say we go into this thinking not in terms of this is our thing for the 24-year-old, this is the thing for our 34-year-old, this is our thing for our 54-year-old. But we do kind of use, and Mariah deserves a lot of credit for this, we kind of do, we don't do a lot of traditional advertising. And even our family of Boston beer, 5 national brands, Dogfish does by far the least amount of national advertising. But what we really do is try hard to engage in human scale dialogue with our 1.3 million followers. And when we do a project like we did a beer called Asteroid City with Wes Anderson, the film director, it didn't get to Burke, it didn't get distribution, but it created I don't know how many millions of conversations nationally, and listening to who were echoing back to us on that collaboration, and to think about what in our national portfolio might resonate with them was a really, really important part of that. And a project like that isn't going to scale revenue-wise, but it is going to matter to a really broad age demographic. So we're always trying to be thoughtful about making sure the conversation's happening with legal drinking age people of all ages, more so than we're worried about, oh shit, we've got to think about the 24-year-old that's drinking in volume.
Dave, is it a foregone conclusion that craft brewers will have to extend beyond the normal definition of beer to stay relevant?
No, I don't think that's a foregone conclusion. I think the beauty of craft is its flexibility. It's got a wide spectrum of styles. You can dial up and down a lot of the attributes along the way. We see it with this single serve in the format only. The beer is available in multiple formats, to Sam's point, but single serve seems to resonate to reach a different consumer. I think it's a very specific occasion. It allows drinkers that want to control how much volume they're having per occasion. It says it right there. They can spend a little bit less, bring a little bit less, walk away happy. So I think there are a lot of avenues that craft beer, traditional craft beer in your head, can go about reaching different consumers. It might not be a demographic reach, but an occasion. Start there with certain occasions. What are you looking for a beach occasion, a party at someone's house occasion? Start there and then figure out how you can fit that mold, but without going way outside the box that you're used to.
Kristen, I want to circle back to package with you for a second, because 4-pack 16-ounce cans were super important in this market. How are those performing at distribution?
Yeah, absolutely. So the 4-pack 16-ounce cans is absolutely critical for us, and it's done phenomenal in Boston. Only recently where seems to be a bit of maturation there, where when we just did a recent survey, there was a bit more than we would like out of code on the warm shelf. So I think we're really learning that the cold box is absolutely critical now to win with the 4-pack 16-ounce cans. The other thing we've started to really determine is that if that's your lead package, it does a lot better. If it's incremental off of a package that's already successful, unless it really it's bringing a new experience or a new occasion to the consumer, it just seems to get a little bit lost. Whereas if it's your lead and it's in the cold box, it continues to crush.
Can I ask, you're probably asking Andrea too, because I bet that's relatively regional, like what we're finding. Can you maybe talk about the regionality of 4-pack 16-ounce even compared to 19.2?
Yeah, so it definitely is a regional thing. So Northeast, we see huge penetration of the 16-ounce can 4-packs. That's not to say they don't sell well elsewhere, but honestly, I think it's more of like what the breweries have had access to and what they do. To me, and this is completely anecdotal, but I do think that package signals local to a lot of customers. So like that's an easy signal for them to say like, okay, great, I'm gonna pick up that package. It's a local item or it's something like crafty and that's what I want. So what we do see is as you get further away from the home market, they do start to slow down. And exactly what you said, Kristen, if it's a secondary package, or quite frankly, if you're a large national brewery, the 16-ounce 4-pack doesn't seem to work.
So I'm going to piggyback off that with an audience question. And can I interest you in an 8-pack, 16-ounce craft variety pack?
Yes.
You can.
Yeah.
How about you, Kristen?
Yes. If she says yes, then yes.
This is how the 3-tier works. This is how the 3-tier works.
So.
And now we'll start making that in between.
That's the perfect answer. I don't know what else to do after that. You know? Yeah, that totally should. But another audience question. How much growth is too much growth? At what point do we shift focus from growing to maintaining? Asking specifically about volume, so I guess I'll ask you, Sam, you know, will we ever be satisfied?
How much growth? We have to grow. I mean, that's biology at its base. But making sure that we're growing in a way that's like sustainable and thoughtful, I think's a big part of that. I'm not sure if that's specific to craft or what it's specific to. But I would just say growth is life. So it's like part of reality. I don't know how to answer that seemingly existential question.
So I guess we heard that 8-pack, 16-ounce craft variety pack is potentially a yes, but what do you not want to see at this point from the suppliers who are pitching you?
Truth serum here. What do you got?
Well, it's, going back to earlier, the 150th, mango IPA or fruit punch IPA, or, just the iterations of, in terms of packaging specifically, obviously I'm very happy 22-ounce bombers thank you. It was a great ride, but, they take up a lot of space on the shelf. So I'm happy to be out of that business. And then just, unique packaging is good. 8-packs are working in hard beverage, obviously, so that's why I said immediate yes. 8-pack works well. It's premium, and you can get a price point similar to a 12-pack, and so it's not scary to a customer. But kind of those like really wacky off-the-wall things. We've seen a lot of interesting things with like K-cup style products, and those, they lose interest very quickly. So we bring them in, they take up some room on the shelf, and then, they go away, and nobody really wants that.
Kristen, is there anything Burke doesn't want to see any more of?
Well, I agree. I mean, the distributor in me says anything that doesn't stack, but whatever. It's anything that doesn't work or isn't incremental or doesn't offer a new experience. It's really by the supplier working together, determining, is it redundant or is it adding additional value to your brand? That's really the cornerstone of the conversation.
Dave, we've seen a lot of price taken over the last couple of years. How wary should brewers, suppliers be that they're pricing the consumer out?
I mean, price sensitivity is always a reality, to different degrees, to different shoppers. I think, though, if we look at the different price tiers within craft, it used to be where majority, if not all of the growth was driven by those higher tiers, $40, $50, $60 a case equivalent brands. This is all to consumer, no behind-the-scenes pricing numbers I'm mentioning here. We're seeing that narrative not be quite as true these days, but that doesn't mean that value is selling, off the shelf rapidly either. I think at the end of the day, if the consumer in their mind can justify the quality that they view in that product on the shelf, high-end craft still works, Apex craft still works, occasions, special brands that mean a lot to you, brands you're willing to extend for. So sensitivity is always a concern no matter what the business is. And it might not be as gung-ho as it was 4, 5, 6 years ago, but those core competencies and behaviors of the craft consumer are very much still there. Masked under all these, large level trends, it's very much still there.
Audience question here. How concerned are distributors about brands' marketing initiatives given the controversy surrounding Bud Light? So do you have an increased sensitivity to marketing initiatives at this point, and how much forewarning do you want?
That's an excellent question. I mean, I would like to think that that was a one-off, because as much as we're doing well because of it, the first people I think of are the people that are actually selling the beer. You know, no one wants that for anyone. I think the name of the game is collaboration and working together to, you know, whether it's a heads up and allowing feedback to be heard, or you know, working together. A lot of our partners, we really are partners, and it's, you know, we listen to each other both ways. And I think if we had any real concerns, we would hear about it. But yeah, I hope that never happens to anyone, you know.
Sam, has that changed Dogfish Head, Boston's approach at all to the way that they handle their marketing initiatives?
You know, my wife Mariah runs DEI for Boston Beers, sitting here, and you know, we would say that we watched it carefully. You know, Mariah oversees social impact, and we're watching it carefully and kind of echoing Kristen's concerns. We're very sensitive to the conversation. I mean, we're proudly rocking our Love Conquers Ale banner and program here. So we're a super inclusive company in all degrees, but we're watching those conversations carefully and just echoing like the concern for all the people who are impacted by these conversations. So watching carefully.
We'll go final question here. A little bit of what I talked to Adam from Castle Island about was focus and simplification. As we're sitting here now, you know, mid-year, how would you like to see your partners focus and simplify as we head into the fall and next year? And I'll start with you, Kristen.
I think for us, we always sit down and we create a plan for the year. So there's a lot of noise that happens throughout the year, but staying focused on the plan that we make as partners together and not getting lost in the weeds and simplifying the objectives of how we achieve it, I think is probably the best thing we both can do.
Andrea, what kind of simplification and focus would you like to see from brewers?
I agree completely with Kristen. It's just about, you know, doing things intentionally and making sure that what we're working on with our suppliers and deciding to do is executable for everyone and simple to put in place for all markets. So really and also just kind of like closing that feedback loop, and that's something that, you know, we can all work on. We can all be better at. I could be better at it. Just making sure that we're all aligned in what we're trying to do and making sure that everybody agrees that what we're doing is possible.
Do you feel focused, Sam?
I'm sorry, what'd you say, Justin?
And that's how we end on a high note.
Well, I want to add to that, which is just to say, because the last panel did an awesome job, I thought, of addressing this too, is, you know, in this tumultuous moment when there is so many SKUs from beer and beyond beer, when you're bringing the recipes that you love towards the 3-tier, you got to be more judicious and go deeper with fewer SKUs, but that doesn't mean you got to go deeper with fewer and less innovations. As we use our smaller brewing systems to perfect in our own tap rooms or our own state, liquids that we're excited about, recipes, beers that we're excited about, but then take advantage of things like a variety pack, which you said we're growing, or a seasonal program where it's one SKU, but you get to bring that creativity into something that's not going to disrupt inventory control for the distributors or shelf place for the retailers. I think that's something we all as craft brewers can really take advantage of, those that we want to distribute in the 3-tier system, is how do we use fewer SKUs to bring a disproportionate amount of innovation and excitement to the customer.
Well, please give it up for Andrea, Sam, Kristen, and Dave. This was a great panel. And Sam, I know you want to shout out some folks too, so I'll let you do it.
I just wanted to give massive thanks for preparing an event like this in the middle of summer. So Travis, May, Devin, Matt, all of our coworkers at Boston Beer, could you give it up for those that really put a shit ton into hosting this. I do want to say, and you said this at the top of the first meeting, Justin, I think we have 5 New England Guild leaders here representing, I think, over 1,000 craft breweries. So when you talk about rising tide, lifting all ships, here's to all the 1,000-ish brewers represented by the guilds that are here tonight. Together we are heavy.
And I want to thank the earlier panelists, Adam, Dino, Megan, Kimberly, Naveen. Thanks to all of them for doing this. Thanks to all of you for coming out here, supporting the Guild, supporting Brew Talks. We really appreciate it. We're going to be back here, well, not here. We're going to be in Denver for the Great American Beer Festival. September 21st is the next Brew Talks event, so circle that on your calendars. And thanks to the Brewbound team and everybody behind the scenes. Give it up for them and Zoe and everybody, and let's get a beer. Woo! Woo! Thank you.